LED lighting for motorcycles has evolved tremendously, and a good example of that is the DENALI 2.0 lineup. Now what's new? All new LEDs that are more powerful yet more efficient, improved optics, and increased lens options. Now not only that, but we've gone through and completely changed the wiring harness to make it easier to install, cleaner, and more reliable. How much easier? Well, we're going to show you. We'll walk you through an installation of the DR1 and a DM on this KTM, and you'll see what we're talking about. Before we get into the actual installation, let's take a look at what's included in a DENALI light kit. Now we sell these as pods individually or light kits. If you're starting from scratch installing on a bike that has no other lighting system on it, you want the kit. The kit includes 2 pods. In this case it's a DR1. This happens to have a 10-watt Cree LED and optics that really focus the light far away from the bike. Also comes with complete waterproof harness. There's some real nice improvements for this year. First of all, the switch, completely waterproof and potted on the back. It also has enough surface area here you could stick it to someplace on the bike, or you can use one of these mounts. That happened to be for a 7/8 inch bar, and there's for your 1-inch bar. All of the DENALI lights come with 2 sets of optics. Standard is the spot optic, which is a clear lens. You can also install the flood optic. Now this is what's called a true hybrid because it's a little bit of a spot and a little bit of a flood, kind of the best of both worlds for a single lamp setup. The other cool thing about it is we've figured out that you can position one of these with the spot and one with the flood, so the 2 together actually give you a couple of different looks on the bike. You've got a long distance beam and you've got a wide beam that work really well together. So all of this was really designed to improve the quality of the installation, to make it go faster and to make it much more reliable. The cool thing about the DENALI 2.0s is they come with a pair of lenses right in the box. What's already installed on this DM is the clear spotlight. Now what's also in there though is an E-marked floodlight. Now we're going to exchange these so that you can see the difference. Now obviously the flutes in there are going to spread out the light, make it a little bit more horizontal. The spot is obviously for optimizing distance. This is all very easily done. We'll remove the 3 screws on the back, pull the bezel off, and while we're doing that we're actually going to upgrade to the optional amber lenses. Now this comes in the same configuration. You have the spot clear and then you have the fluted, which is a flood. The lens on the DM is held in by the bezel and sealed by this little O-ring. The other lights use a slightly different process, but the idea is the same, to make sure the LED stays dry. But in this one, we're going to install the amber. So we're going to bring this up, make sure the flutes are on the outside and vertical. We know that our mounting point is going to be this way, so this is vertical for the light. Drop the bezel on. The bezel can only go one way, and you'll feel it hit home just like that. Make sure it's centered in the face. Now to start the installation itself, we're going to do something really smart, which is to take as much bodywork off the bike as we need to get good access to the chassis and the electrical system. Every bike is going to be a little bit different. Some will be easier than others, obviously, but the idea is you don't want to be fighting with bodywork, and you really want to be able to see where the wires are going to go so that you don't get them near anything hot or anything that could chafe. Now with any of these installations, we start with where the lights are actually going to go. That determines kind of where the wires are going to need to go and how much wiring loom you have available. In the case of this KTM, we're going to do a pair of DMs on the lower fork on fender mounts. We're going to do a pair of DR1s on mounts that are specific to this bike, and we know from experience those go right onto the fuel tank. So we have an idea of where the lights are going to be in space. We can start the wiring back from there. What's unusual about this bike is the Sw-Motech bike-specific mounts actually mount to the tank. Now we've got the tank off of this so that we can actually work on the chassis. We'll come back to that. We'll show mounting up the lights to these brackets. But the idea now is to sort of orient the lights basically in space where we know they're going to go so that we can figure out where the wiring needs to go. Now that we've mounted the light, the next step is to get the harness together. Now we're constrained in a couple of places by this. One, where the lights are going to be mounted, and 2, where the battery is in the bike. And the main wiring harness is what connects those 2. So we'll follow this up. Gives us an idea basically where on the bike this wants to go. So we've got this in place, going to connect it in, and that tells us that we can get the harness down here on the inside of the frame. That gives us enough lead on the back end to get to the battery. And we know we've got a little bit of location back here where we can hide some of the rest of the wiring. So again, every bike is going to be a little bit different. You might have to be a little bit creative about it. And in particularly large bikes where the battery is on one end and the lights are on the other, don't worry about it. We have extension cords for these that allow you to add 4 feet to it. No problem at all. Should handle most installations. Now that we figured out where the connector is going to come up from the lights themselves, and we've laid down the part of the harness that connects to the lights, we're going to do one more thing while we're up here, and that's the switch harness. Now this comes back from the same connector pack at the back of the harness, and it connects to the switch, which we partly run up to the steering head. Now, basically going to connect these two together. That's going to put the switch in line. Now what about these guys? We're going to run this white wire up into the headlight shell to grab 12 volts switched power. That's going to tell the lights to turn on and off with the key. What about this little guy? Well, if we upgrade to the dual intensity controller, we're going to connect this with the supplied wire. And we're going to run him into the headlight shell to grab the high beam circuit. Now the purpose of that is to tell the system when to go to high intensity. The idea is you want high intensity when the high beams are on. So that's the concept behind wiring the switch. But what we're actually going to do on this bike is set up the DMs to run anytime the bike is running. Now you could leave the switch in place for that, and that's fine, but we're going to save that slot for controlling the DR1s we're going to install later on. So in that case, we're going to install the switch eliminator plug. It's basically a jumper plug, plugs into here. So now that anytime there's 12 volts on this white line, the DMs will be running. Now that we've run the cabling up around the headstock, it's time to connect the switch. Now what I've already done is run the connector down through the triple clamp, past the headstock, making sure it's clear of all the steering mechanism. Now we've got to figure out how we're going to connect it to the bar. The standard thing in every kit comes with the switch, a little piece of sticky tape. So if you have a flat surface or any fairing, you could actually stick it directly to that. It's not a bad solution. We also provide a couple of these hasps. This is a really clever design. This is the 1 inch, and this is our 7/8. Basically, these are designed for the handlebar to go through here, the 2 screws to go on like that, and it'll clamp directly to the handlebar. No extra muss or fuss. Now, I don't quite have enough room because I got a lot of junk on this handlebar, so what I've decided to do is go for this optional plate. This plate will actually connect directly to the screw that holds the mirror and clutch housing on, and so bolt just like this, a couple of screws, and we're good to go. So on this KTM, we're actually installing 2 sets of lights. We're going to show you how the primary harness for the DMs is going to go together. When we do the DR1s, that essentially we're going to replicate what we're doing here. Of course, the trick is to find room for 2 sets of wires, but fortunately, there's plenty of room to do it. Now that we've got everything connected up front, we're going to come back and tidy it up later, but we're going to find room for the rest of the harness down here. So we found a little spot right between the subframe and the shock. We can allow this harness to come on down. Basically, it'll allow us to put the controller back here. I'll get to that in a second. The important thing is to make sure that the remaining wires back to the battery will reach, and those look pretty good. So now we have this connector that's open. What are we going to do with that? You're going to connect one of 2 things to it. If you're going to use a single intensity system, this is the power relay. That's what you're going to plug into it. The cool thing about the Denali 2.0 is you can connect up the data dim controller, which will allow you to have dual intensity. That goes in the same thing. Simply this box, it's a little bit bigger, but goes into the same connector. Just like that. And we're going to route that back along the subframe. So one of the last things we're going to do is connect the system up to the battery. Obviously red to red, just to be safe. We're going to pull the fuse out. All right, so that's it. The last piece of bodywork on the KTM is in. The next thing to do is really turn on the lights, make sure everything works. We'll set it outside and we'll do a little bit of aiming. Then we'll go ride and enjoy it. So as you can see from the installation process, the Denali 2.0 product line is actually a lot easier to deal with. The wiring harness improvements are just really icing on the cake for much better LEDs, better optics, and a lot more options. Now you can see the entire line of the Denali 2.0 at twistedthrottle.com.